Sometimes reflection's a bad thing. You need to be in the moment. But when I really confront the question and try to justify my drastic career change, the first thing that comes to mind is the last day of my junior year at Harvard. My next door neighbor stabbed her roommate, Trong Ho, to death, then stabbed Chong's cousin, who was able to escape. In the ensuing chaos, Harvard police, Cambridge police, Massachusetts State Police converged on Dunster House and searched for the suspect. Unbeknownst to those first responders, she had already hanged herself in the bathroom. Not having been touched by violence growing up at all, I really had no ability to process this. To this day, I still remember a Cambridge police officer who encountered me, quickly determined that I was not a threat, left to search for the suspect, and later returned and was nice enough to talk to me at length about the incident because I was completely devastated. I remember thinking that being able and equipped and competent to help people in crisis, people at their breaking point, people whose lives have been suddenly marred and forever changed by violence, that was worth doing and worth doing well. I take away from this story the idea that any justification of career choice has to be able to survive both moments of quiet reflection and moments of fear and loathing. Even the idle rich, by the way, who don't have to work for a living, face this dilemma. Or if they opt for a life of hedonism, as Bernard Williams once memorably put it in a lecture here on this campus, their mental lives will be about as interesting as a McDonald's without customers. Wherever your work life takes you, within whatever entrepreneurial or institutional embrace, I assure you that you will encounter people whose beliefs have never been subjected to reason's demand for consistency and justification. Another quick story about that. Just a few days after a BART police officer accidentally shot and killed an unruly rider, a planned protest convened in downtown Oakland to encourage the DA to file murder charges against the officer. As night fell, a significant segment of the crowd turned out to be comprised of amateur anarchists. They were masked up. They had backpacks with who knows what concoctions out of the anarchist cookbook on the internet. I'm pretty sure I saw some with cow stitching on the backpacks. Anyway, after an unlawful assembly was declared, I was part of a skirmish line to push the protesters away from city center. As we scraped some of the protesters off the wall, I was able to get a look at a few of them. Their masks fell off as they were grabbing items from their backpack to throw at the riot police. But the line was moving pretty fast. The skirmish line was kind of pushing them, and they wound up taking off down some side streets. And as the mob ran down side streets that we could see kind of in the distance, they started setting fire to parked cars, smashing windows of cars and businesses in the area. Maybe some of you saw that on the news over there. About 15 minutes later, my squad and I are finally making our way down these side streets. And I see these three anarchists. And they're clearly extremely relieved to see us. And they are frantically flagging us down. Our cars, someone burned them. What are you going to do about it? And I was thinking to myself, we're the parky in anarchy. So I'm not really sure what they expected from us. Their protest, as intended, managed to shut BART down. There's no public transportation. Their colleagues have destroyed their vehicles. The police are tired of trying to contain the violence and vandalism. They don't have time to take reports. I said, you guys are going to have to find your own way home. The anarchist flight is, among other things, the result of being insufficiently reflective. There is simply no substitute for one's own active, searching self-scrutiny. I'm sure you've heard the cliche that we're all protagonists of our own life stories. It's not exactly the problem of other minds, but let me extend that metaphor. Many are also the unreliable narrators of their stories, but they will never realize that their worldview is a world apart. These unreliable narrators are perfectly content with their warped accounts of what has happened to them and why. I always think of Hobbes on the equality of distribution of what he calls wisdom, but I guess what we would call maybe common sense. Quote, they will hardly believe there be many so wise as themselves, for there is not ordinarily a greater sign of the equal distribution of anything than that every man is contented with his share. It takes work to become a reliable narrator of one's life story. It takes honesty and humility and a desire to understand things, really understand things, rather than to be thought to understand. Think about the phrase, "you are what you habitually do." This is also the case for our mental habits of stepping back and assessing the unthinking and often harmful habits we all develop over time. Police work involves an artificial increase in the frequency of one's exposure to lies, to deceit, to people in extreme moments of crisis in which their worst and least rational selves are on display. Desperate people and people with various psychotropic substances on board typically see the world a bit differently. One last story. My first Sergeant Pat Garrahan was a veritable savant at detecting such people. Just a savant. One night around 3 a.m. we did a walking stop. I covered him. He placed the suspect in the rear of my patrol car and filming it. This guy was just running full speed down the street. I'm sure he just did a robbery or shooting up the street. I'm gonna go find out. So he asked the guy, "Why were you running?" The guy says, "Didn't you see those dogs? A big black Rottweiler and a little brown pit bull? They were chasing me." Garrahan rolls his eyes at me, and he drives off to go find some possible victims, maybe find a crime scene. Comes back a few minutes later, and it's pretty clear that he's met with what we tend to call negative results. So he goes back to the suspect to try to get him to talk. He says, "I found those dogs, the little brown pit, the big black rot, and they said they weren't chasing you." The suspect's face just fell, like the jig was up. But before admitting to the shooting he'd just done, he made a valiant effort to stick to his story. "Those dogs are lying. They weren't chasing me." I'd like to end by talking briefly to the parents in the audience. I recently became a father, and my daughter, right here, Claire, turns 10 months old today. Words can't really express the way that a child thwarts and reshapes your life. I really couldn't put it any better than Christopher Hitchens in his recent memoir. He wrote, "Nothing can make one so happily exhilarated or so frightened. It's a solid lesson in the limitations of self to realize that your heart is running around inside someone else's body." So congratulations, parents, congratulations, family and friends, and congratulations, graduates.